Friends, welcome to Precise Elements, where we explore the very depths of world formation in late Platonism, or also is known as New Platonism. Here I have my glass spheres of our previous videos. I have it turning around an axis so that we can see the reflection of the sphere. And I begin this video with the inner port. I say, I see the world because I form it where it is seen, instantly and flawlessly. And we ask who the looker is in our videos. Now, the inner port is something, thing I noticed in my own contemplations through the years, and I noticed when I write, I do mostly my contemplation every day. One has to come into the habit of a specific time of the day and to start, whatever it was, learning is a contemplation, prayer is contemplation, and so on. So the passage of our fantasy is this inner port, this passage to self-discovery and its deep psychology. And the inner port affords us, our fantasy, an entering into our own divinity, and entering into us, and entering into the soul, which I discovered before I came to Plato. And then here is the other thing that I've also noticed, is that the life difficulties which we experience, are door openers for spiritual growth. We'll come there. We'll come to that point. So looking within in silence, a lifestyle of prayer and work and learning is the passage to self-awareness and discovery. Now, in our previous videos, I said that I choose my images. I try and be careful in the choice of my images. So here is no exception here. We have a body of water. We have the sky reflecting over there. There's birds on the water, trees reflecting, bushes reflecting on the surface of the water. There's man-made structures on the other side, looks like telephone wires. There is a mountain, and here we have our icon with the earth that I placed encircled in a wholeness, and also is an indication of circular time. Our earth here is not the earth of modern physics. It really is, the earth has the ancient sort as the center of the world, connected with a through line to the most divine of divinities. We have Christ up here, and here we have Elijah and his fiery chariot up there, to which we shall come back. So we have the four elements. We have water, earth, we have fire, air, and the mountain up which we must climb, Sophia, for our knowledge, the mount. It is on this mount that Jesus was wondering, he was speaking to Moses and Elijah. We'll come to. So here too we have a pathway along the edge of the water. This also symbolizes the way, the inner way, the Tao Te Ching. There's many religions who have this inner path as a central teaching. Ancient well springs, the fountains, are timeless inner beacons for all of our souls. Man visits these ancient well springs, like the Divine Mother, for instance, like the poets and the visionaries and the mystics. When his world falls apart and things start to go wrong, such as, for instance, when you get stiffed at work or sidelined. Getting stiff sucks, especially if you're not prepared. Well, who is prepared for this? But the private sector is a brutal place. More later. But fear and difficulty, life's problems, not thriving, are all ways and means of seeking and entering into one's soul. And the practice of psychological constraint in both thought, especially passion, and habits is the essence of self-discovery, especially habit. One has to come into the create space, like my space. I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's my best thinking time, and that can be stretched over weekends until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm used to this. It's been a long-standing habit. Get a piece of paper to write with. Just start writing down your thoughts. In a more ancient time, the constraints of passion, opinion, and desire in one's personal behavior and spiritual behavior was really important. And constraint is a central teaching by Socrates in the Republic of Plato. Restraint, well practiced with a great deal of discipline, is an inner doorway to self-knowledge and self-discovery, a teaching that's found in many, many religions. The ancient Eleusinian mysteries are no exception, and it revolved around such constraints in behavior, in spirit, and in prayer. Prayer is a central concept in the works of Proclus that we are going to examine in this video. That this initiation of the soul is an initiation into self-awareness and the vehicle of the soul, which is where we're going to go with this video, an internal psychological formation of the fantasy. The rituals of the Eleusinian mysteries required a lifelong practice, and this afforded the passage of awareness, of inner awareness and of the fantasy. Which are these ancient things then? Seclusion, exile, galut in Hebrew, Moses, and personal sacrifice. Now this is important to note, that not the sacrifice of others like we have today for this great cause of say the climate change, for instance, marginalize the most poor of people. So the sacrifice that says it's for a greater good. We should be aware of those kind of things, because that's really not good for the poorest of the poor people and the average people in the street. The exile then was the iconical elevation of Moses in the desert, his soul, climbing the mountain. Do we need ancient forms of initiation today? Because we see that Jesus Elijah is right here. How did he meet with Moses and Elijah on the mount? And how did Hermes Trismegistus were able to draw down his divine vision on the mount? And what about Elijah's chariot of fire? What about the vision of Moses on Mount Sinai? Ancient fountains, we think, don't disappear. And ardent attention, loving attention, is needed here. Awareness is the present state of our consciousness, provides the internal fire for transformation. Plato himself draws his philosophy through his own interforming fantasy and from more ancient fountains. In this video, which we entitle Notes Before Plato, we endeavor to indicate that the Platonists of the late period, or Neoplatonism, integrated the whole Platonic theology, which includes the works of more ancient theologians, hence Notes Before Plato. Proclus is an important philosopher of 450 AD-ish that we are going to treat of in this video. He was the head of the Athenian schools, a very important position that he had in Rome, well trained in the ancient traditions, and the Romans, there were several Roman emperors, amongst which is Patronus Maximus, and so in his time there were maybe 3 or 4. So his works, to me, captures the theology of Plato and gather together the summit of Platonic thought, as we have seen in video 9, our previous video. What prompted me to study these works was when I came across a letter that he wrote to Theodorus the mechanist, the physicist, where he talks about internal intuitive projection. Well, I found it was because I've always been interested in projection, the phenomena of projection, and I found this kind of gripped my soul, and this is how I began to study this work of Thomas Taylor. I find here in Blumenthal, an author in 2000 whose work on projection is very good. So to orientate us toward to this presentation, he's one of the major figures, and he captures in his elements, he has 4 propositions on the vehicle of the soul, or the fantasy. These propositions are followed by his works, by his propositions on the world soul, which follows on his propositions from intellect. So in the Platonic tradition and the ancient traditions, the demonstrations either began from being, the highest being, or it began from the corporeal sensible world, as we began. So why are these propositions on the vehicle of the soul relevant? Well, a lot of things have been said over the last 2,000 years on these things. And I think that he gives us a unique late Platonic perspective, a window through which we can examine and see what the ancient thought, because he draws from more ancient people like Pythagoras, as we saw yesterday, his work. So he's a good important philosopher to examine and see how the knife fits into the handle, so to speak. So critical to this understanding is Proclus. Inward-looking assent, the anagogic in the elevation of Plato's cave, inward-looking elevation is known as anagogia, or the anagogic of the soul. Self-knowledge and self-discovery are critical concepts. The practice of virtue, to which silent dialogue, and internal through logos is critical. Before we get to his propositions, I thought we need to perhaps look at some central concepts in these works that might help us to understand it a little better. I must say this is probably one of the more difficult videos to produce because the concepts we are not familiar with, and I think this is probably to be laying at the door of the philosophers. There are few philosophers today who, the philosophers, I mean those that came over the last 400 years up to say 1950-ish, because from 1950 these works have gained a lot more traction, and for very, very good reason, because they represent a wholly different world perspective with reference to the Cartesian world. So there are some central concepts that we are going to have to look at, make it easier for us to understand, on conversion, assimilation, and possession, on unproceeding, the proceeding, and that which is progressing, and then on analogies. These are very important aspects of Platonic philosophy. First, we'll look at conversion, assimilation, and possession, which is twofold: downward and upward. We have the good, we see the good as a summit, and the downward here we have the external corporeal world. Our icon, again, is not orientated in our physical gnosis of space-time, is interior. Rather, we should see this interior and exterior. The formation of a human being is from internal to external. I see that the physicist Michael Levin, he is biting around this notion of an internal, but he's still looking toward Cartesian. I think there's a lot of emergence towards this work in today's electro-biology. So we should understand this from interior and exterior, upper and lower, and even up and down are terms we use because we don't know how to express infinity, the intermediate world. There's no corporeal expressions for it. So instantaneous cosmic formation is what we are talking about, and which we have spoken about in our previous videos. Now, we mentioned that conversion, the convertive and assimilative, there is also the possessive. So possessive is really an idea of Aristotle, which says that intellect, our perception, is entirely possessive. So downward evolution is evolving and unfolding, and always there is force and power, immaterial forces and power evolving, as we'll see, from whose form is the downward evolution of form. The psycho-intellectual conversion of form and matter in Pythagoras, as we saw in our previous video, is here applicable. A downward evolution means there is separation and division, and it's an instantaneous cascade of assimilation, the forming power of the fantasy. Privation in the corporeal world, there is privation, our individual consciousness, and the many is the external, the unfoldment, the evolving unfoldment of the many. And in Plato, in Proclus's work. Next, we have the upward movement of conversion, assimilation, and possession. This is the return. There is always return from an evolution, and it's the interformation through emergence of the corporeal manifest world. There is an interaction that is also upward, and in Proclus's work this is known as return, the interformation through emergence from within the interforming unity of man and nature. Man then within the whole of his interconnection with nature, and the emerging ideas from that. An internal upward converting, I'm using the word cascade, falling a love upwards. I've seen that Bishop Magnus is using this term. I think it's a beautiful term. Cascade is perhaps not the right word, maybe in the image of a climbing up a mountain. Self-knowledge is an inner work. The episteme, knowledge, is an inner work, and it's got very little to do with modern logic and its algebras. So this return is the internal elevation of the soul in Plato and from Plato's cave, and it is simulative, convertive, and possessive. And involution, contraction are central concepts pertaining to this. So internal unification through logos or an inner dialogue is the means of self-elevation. To some, instantaneous world information through both poles, an upper pole and a lower pole, being who contains all forms in one, and a corporeal world, and the complexity of matter and the many. Both poles are necessary for world formation. In the next place we are going to look at Plato's analogies, which are the other important thing to understand for what is to follow. Analogies indicate sameness and difference, and we have seen in our previous video that the cosmic egg of Orpheus, there's also the same concept in Indian philosophy, the Hirangrabha, the cosmic egg of Indian philosophy. There is the yin-yang symbol. It all has the same idea. So sameness and difference subsisting in the evolution of principle, the downward evolution of principle, such as in this symbol. Sameness is communicated through form or principle, unity or a monad. And difference is indicated through the evolution of form downward, and can be understood as the attribute to with reference to principle or differentiation. Analogies are commensurate with form and imitation, upward involution and downward evolution. We can already see here is different concepts involved in the Ptolemaic world. So that as an analogy we have in the corporeal world Maya, mother of Hermes, of Mercury, the last feminine fountain, that's an analog of night or infinity or Eve in the highest of divinities. But there is an important analogy, and that's the analogy according to summit or principle, which denotes all these analogies. They denote the connective, that things are connected according to order and principle. So nothing in the world, nothing in our world has being without the connection to principle. And a view to understand this is by how much the soul surpasses a partible nature. Partible natures are natures corporeal and closer to the corporeal, the mundane world, which is vast and without end. By so much it falls short of an impartible summit. We'll revisit these terms again. So the idea here is that analogy connects the whole of the soul and nature according to proportion or ratio, proceeding from principle, an impartible principle, and returning by the primary and self-motive boundaries of the equal. In Socrates divides the line in the equal and unequal. We'll visit that soon. So the fantasy is the vehicle of the soul, is assimilative, respective of, and interconnected to higher intellect. Through this connection is a connection of principle. So in Proclus there are three major causal orders of being according to connection. The first is the unproceeding. The unproceeding in this is that which is in itself and without separation or division. There is the proceeding, the wholeness, which proceeds through the whole of itself without separation or division, but it holds the forms without division in itself. And then there is the progressing, which is the evolving downward. The final cause, for those who might be interested, is the summit of all external downward evolutions, the beginning of non-being, privation, or true appearances. Hence, says Proclus, on account of this connectivity, from the first illumination immediately after the one, the whole intelligible expanse and the whole of the material or corporeal world is comprehended through interforming media. And we can have seen in our series up to this point that there are many different views of the different philosophers. They all converge on the same forming principles with the same meaning. A conjunction indeed that we think that converges upon the same subtle internal psychological structure of cosmic fantasia, not something we hear of easily today. Which brings us to the propositions of Proclus on the vehicle of the soul. His propositions on the vehicle of the soul follows from his propositions concerning intellect, and this is followed by his propositions on the soul. So his elements is composed from the highest of being to the most extreme of the corporeal world of matter and its complexity. Now, why would this be relevant? He's an icon to me that reflects ancient thought on internal projection or emanation and the higher forms of self-awareness. He formalizes in the ancient tradition his views on the fantasy, which tradition I've recently seen is getting criticized for its circularity. But this this circularity is reflective of the way that the world was viewed as a circle, and the many circles, the many revolutions, say, of the zodiac or the heavens, and everything was nested within a wholeness. It's not like we have today at all. So their demonstrations reflected this, the mystical. And our view in the world so would be as follows. We view it as a nested, a perfect medium within the supreme sphere of illumination. But the world soul is the medium between the impartible and the natures who are essentially changed. Those are forms. Remember, we said that being holds all forms in one form. Natures that are essentially changed are natures that undergo material changes. They possess the images or forms of intellect secondarily. This is the world soul possessed forms in intellect, in being, life, and intellect secondarily, which conforms, as we have seen with the more ancient Pythagoras, which we had on video 9. So being is the single fountain without separating distinctions, the same with one or united unity, but is not the one. And then here we have division in the bottom, division and separation. Now our self-knowledge is not arriving at a true totality of knowledge. I don't know, we don't really know. Same with, I had my doubts doing this video very much, because we don't know. We are uncertain. Certainty is insanity. But between these, our fantasy is co-nascent with the soul, assimilating, forming, receiving, as we've seen in our other videos. Our looking is capable of true reasoning when well exercised. That's the meaning of it. Thus, our looking is the principle in us of this instantaneous, simultaneous image formation in the corporeal world, and which we may say would be the last of interconnected analogies. So here is we have an orientation to Proclus using the hierarchy of the cosmic fantasy of Pythagoras that we have, because he incorporates Pythagoras in his works. We have that which is the same with one, a single fountain, which we just see comprehends the whole of intelligible and corporeal world in one illumined sphere, if you like. We have the intelligible, which is the impartible, the immovable, and essence, which precedes the self-motive form. Here is where we had Rhea, Eve, Jupiter or Zeus, or the demiurgus, and which Proclus is the supermundane world, across the mundane world. And we have the mundane figure. The mundane world is a vast world with, it's an infinite world with no end. Here we find figure moved by another, forces, nature. We'll come back to these as we go along. So the corporeal world of vibration or vibration of matter, the world that is instantly perceptible within our looking. There are 4 propositions on the vehicle of the soul in the Elements of Proclus, and we'll put the links to these works in. First, the first proposition is proposition 207. There's altogether 211 propositions. It is quite a work. It is very dense and requires a wide reading to understand the meaning of it. I hope I can do justice with all my doubts I had and the difficulties to produce this. So the vehicle of every soul, I'm going to read this word for word because I think it's a marvel to see how it's done. The vehicle of every soul is fabricated, formed by an immovable cause. We'll come back to this using our icon to explain. For if it, that is to say the vehicle, is perpetually and connascently suspended from the soul, grows with the soul, that uses it, being immutable according to essence, is allotted, ascribed, and a proportional hypostasis from an immovable cause standing under hypostasis. For everything which is generated from movable causes is essentially changed. Moreover, every soul has a perpetual subtle form, a body, which primarily participates of it. Hence, the cause of a partial soul, and therefore of its vehicle, is immovable and on this account supermundane. Using our icon, we have the highest here, the three hypostases of Plotinus, being life and spirit, Sit Sat Ananda in Indian, in the Vedas, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit in Christianity. The soul, says he, the soul is life, vitality or illumination, and is the medium between poles. If we just seen, the vehicle of the soul is connascent, simultaneous with the soul, and we see here connascent, suspended, simultaneous with the soul, that uses it and is immutable according to essence. Well, the essence in this particular case is the essence of form above. And the mundane world, we have the world of generation, Genesis, where we find the movable causes, Genesis of nature, where form is essentially changed. And the essential change of form is the change of matter. And this is the world of Bacchus, Dionysus, Ceres, and Proserpine, the mundane principalities. Hence, the cause of a partial soul, says he, and therefore of its vehicle, is immovable. So partial soul, he says somewhere else in his Elements, descends wholly into generation. This is where the world, the genesis of the world occurs, is the mundane world, the self-moving principles by other things like nature. Forces comes into play here, forces or nature. Partial souls descend wholly into generation and is imperfect on account of privation. Man, the microcosm, is the unity. And we've seen a little earlier that our knowledge is only partial because we don't know everything totally and at once. Proposition 208, the vehicle, immaterial and divisible, vehicle of the soul. The vehicle of every partial soul is immaterial, essentially indivisible, and impassive. Impassive is unreceptive. We'll come and explain that in a minute. For if it proceeds from an immovable fabrication, intellect is perpetual and will have and immaterial and impassive, unreceptive, or imparticipable hypostasis or summit. For such things as are adopted to suffer essentially and to be changed are all of them material, as we have just seen. And in consequence of subsisting indifferently, in different times, are suspended from movable causes. The principle abiding, by analogy, is the father of or remaining in itself, like being, life, and intellects, unproceeding, remaining in itself, is impassive. That is to say, it's unreceptive with reference to downward and external divisions. That in that sense, we get the supermundane world of Rhea and Zeus. The vehicle of the soul or chariot proceeds from this principle and is connascent, vital in the sense of vitality and vivification of Rhea. It's connascent with the soul. The mundane world is the movable principle, essential material changes in form, separation and division, differently at different times. The flowing robes in Orpheus, which we don't treat of here, this is known as the flowing world with the flowing clothes at different times with different material forms, perpetual forms. He continues, he says, hence, likewise, they, things that suffer a change of essence, receive all various mutation, being moved in conjunction with their principles. So, things that suffer a change of essence in the mundane world, this is the genesis of the whole of the celestial world, the sun, the moon, the earth, and all the things we can see with our perception, the corporeal world. This is the beginning of the genesis of the world. So this is moved in conjunction with their principles. Moreover, that this vehicle is indivisible is manifest, for everything which is divided, so far as it is divided, is corrupted in consequence of departing from the greater whole. So the greater whole, supermundane world, is the greater whole, and with reference to the greater whole is corrupted and departing from the continuity of a greater wholeness. That's the meaning of it. If therefore the vehicle of the soul is essentially immutable and impassive, unreceptive according to principle, it will be indivisible, not divided by external divisions of matter. So at the top here we have the immortal summit, world genesis and nature, things that suffer, receive all various material mutations and downward change according to principle. Forces or nature comes into play here. The corporeal world, the vehicle of the soul, is continuous according to analogy, indefinite. And here he says the vehicle of the soul is indivisible, indefinite, and not subject to divisions, because it's not material. Continued, the vehicle of every partial soul descends indeed with the addition of more material vestments. Well, earlier we saw earth, water, fire, air, of which earth and water are the heaviest and air and fire are the lightest. So the additions of these are downward, gathered in downward evolutions, but becomes united to the world soul by an ablation of everything material, a cutting off of everything material, and a recurrence to its proper form, analogous to the soul that uses it. For souls indeed descends irrationally, in the sense of automata, without forethought, assuming rational lives without forethought. So the return, the world soul, I put the world soul the world soul in the impartible. It should probably be a little lower, because the world soul is the medium between impartible or imparticipable and a corporeal. Vehicle of the soul returning through a recurrence and through virtue practice to intellect. Hence division and separation is downward, evolving is non-being totally. We'll come back to these concepts at a later time. But souls, through their vehicles, their chariot in Plato, ascends, laying aside the generation-producing powers of nature, forces, with which it was invested in its descent, and become pure. Returns to the pristine condition of its nature. So the chariot returns, becomes ethereal, which is why there is in the previous videos a direction that we must take care that our perception is always intellectual, always upward toward the good. For the vehicle imitates the lives of the souls that uses it, becomes self-aware, that is, and the lives, being everywhere moved, the vehicle is moved in conjunction with them, elevated. By its circulations, likewise, circulations in the sense that there's instantaneous circles of downward evolving and upward enfolding in this image, in this icon. So by its circulations it represents, or rather brings forth forms, the fantasy, the intellections, perceptions of some souls, angels, and it also brings forth the falling of others through their inclination to the realms of generation, the cave of Plato, and forms the fabric, the purifications of others through circumductions. In other words, it's similar to the image of a circle and a sphere around a fixed point. This circle here encircling the corporeal world is an icon of this revolution. So the corporeal world is in continuous states of instantaneous flux, meaning perpetual differentiation, perpetual forms, forming perpetually, which return leads to an immaterial nature, the sacred circle. Here we see, I think this is an analogy in the Bible to the prodigal son, the return through Christ. The Father who ever abides. But because our fantasy is vivified by the very essence of soul, and is co-nascent, growing simultaneously with them. It is all variously changed in conjunction with their downward evolving energies. The vehicle follows them everywhere, becomes co-passive, co-receptive with them, and is restored to its pristine state, ethereal state. Ether is seated in the cosmic egg, is restored to its pristine state together with them when they are purified. Queen Rhea of the supermundane world is the vital essence of illumination and vivifies the vehicle of the soul as that is co-nascent and bring forth. The vehicle brings forth forms. And here we have the idea of Juno, the Magna Virago is the idea of the whirlpool of ether, where there is a downward evolving and an upward involution or enfolding. In video 6, we describe this process. Fantasia then is co-receptive and grows simultaneously with all the material changes and the movements of nature and the soul, and is elevated internally. The dialogos, through logos, when souls are elevated and aspires after its own perfection, for the fantasy desires the good, the one, and is drawn up by love, loving upwards. Love is the binder of all separated natures. For everything is perfected, says he, when it obtains its proper perfection of form. Thus, the fantasy, the inner port, the inner passage to self-knowledge, and internal elevation, a movement toward the good. Then, Proposition 210 on figure, form, and magnitude. Magnitude is the idea of bulk and size. Every co-nascent vehicle of the soul always possesses both the same figure and magnitude. This is, to me, is really an important aspect of the fantasy. Every co-nascent vehicle of the soul, always possesses both the same figure. Being contains all figures in one, but figure is seen to be greater and less of a dissimilar figure through the additions and ablations of other bodies. For if it derives its essence from an immovable cause, Rhea and Jupiter, it is evident that both its figure and its magnitude are defined by its cause, and each figure and magnitude is immutable and invariable. Moreover, at different times it appears to be different, as likewise greater and less. All forms in one form. The principle defines that which progresses to its exterior, progression, the third of Proclus. The principle does not change or participate, but remains. The vehicle of the soul brings forth formation from its principle and appear at different times or epochs. Form is invariant with reference to change in essence. Here we have very important demonstration. Each figure and magnitude is immutable and invariable, but form in itself is invariant with reference to change in essence. In other words, with reference is invariant with respect to changes in matter in the corporeal world. Hence, through other bodies, fire, air, water, and earth, added from the material elements, and again taken away, the forming vehicle forms or molds, projects, brings forth, exhibits a different appearance, both in quantity and form. Where do we find quantity? We'll see this in a minute here. So we have from the material elements, the addition or ablation of these elements, different magnitudes, different appearances are formed by the fantasy. The forming fantasy exhibits, projects, molds, forms, or perceiving, forming images. A different appearance in quantity and form is corporeal changes. Quantity is in things that we can count, the number of words, the number of letters, the clouds, and so on. To sum what we have learned about, well, that was the end of the propositions on the vehicle. I feel a certain discomfort with the way that I presented this. I might come back to this at another time. So in video 8, 9, and 10, there has been put forth to you the various definitions of the various philosophers of this period on the fantasy. And from this, we can draw some overall perspective on the thought on the fantasy in the times of Plato and Aristotle. So there are two schools of thought that can be gathered from this presentation of ours. There is the peripatetic schools of Aristotle, and they hold that the same phantasm, true appearance, morphotique noesis, in our video 8, I think, must always accompany spiritual intelligence. A phantasm is a form. It's a Greek translation of the word form. Morphe, phantasm, must always accompany spiritual intelligence. Spiritual intelligence precedes, in terms of its order, Saturn, and has heaven, immaterial heaven, and earth as their summit. The spiritual intelligence. So, but the schools of Plato has a different opinion, and they hold that the following view. They say, for the operations of intellect are not dependent on the fantasy through the perceptions of fantasy, even though the fantasy proceed from the energies of intellect. Those are the two schools in BC, and carried through to late Platonic works, maybe through medieval times, but I don't know where Immanuel, Kant, and these people get their ideas of the scholastic ideas from. It's perplexing to me, and I don't have time to spend on looking at that. What shall we say about vision then? In video 1 and 2 of this series, we indicated that Shannon information and related statistics, fantastic as the mechanics is, has nothing to do with vision at all. Given neural nodes and single neural action, and especially mapping from a single photon falling on the retina. This is the image, the small little camera image that we have of the retina. This image has been shown not to be in need of transformation by Gibson. So the idea of coding, mapping from the retina to the various neurons in the brain is up for grabs. In these first videos in this series, we indicated that our perception is a unity, an instant unity or a wholeness, which we proceeded to investigate. Based on the premises we have witnessed so far, we may in a preliminary way indicate that there is a view of the world that is very much very much forgotten. Unintelligible vision of the ancients, intelligible vision, the highest of illuminations, have been shown to be interconnected and interforming with our own vision as a remote extremity in deep antiquity. Here we have Elijah's carriage, the chariot, his fantasy, the vehicle of the soul, the fantasy, the elevating aspect in the cave of Plato, or the feminine fantasia proper is the principality of formation and form. Form is the same as boundary in ever evolving or unfolding downwardly orders. Hence, on account of this unity in our perception that descends from on high, our corporeal perceiving forming is a remote extremity, interforming and interconnected through proportion formed by nature. As it appeared to me then, there can be no looker in the corporeal world without form and formation through ancient fountains, and form cannot be without the looker, for vision and its illumination holds all in one. But the discovery in forming this series, apart from all the contemplative wonders of formation and our fantasy it brought me, is this: form and formation is invariant. Form and its formation is invariant with reference to material change over time. Form is invariant. It's always the same. This stability is form. It is a marvel, I think, of ancient contemplation. And here Plotinus observes, it is requisite, however, that no perturbation, disturbance such as crashing atoms or crashing balls like on a billiard table, for example, or passion should be present with any form, but it is necessary that form should remain permanent, since that which is permanent is intelligible. Invariance of form and its formation is a vast departure that we discovered in these works from bifurcation and mechanics. In the beginning we said, I see the world because I formed it where it is, at once and flawlessly. That the vehicle of the soul affords to us the formation of our looking, and affords higher states of awareness to be formed and to be interforming through assimilation and receiving, is a gift from divinity unfolded for posterity by ancient avatars. Thank you for watching with us. I hope you enjoy. You probably have to watch this a few times to become familiar with the terms. It will make understanding more easy. Please like and subscribe to our videos. Thank you again for watching, and we appreciate your comments in the bottom.